Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the tangled, slow-motion waltz that was dating in the medieval world. A place where romance wasn't just complicated, it was legally binding, sometimes arranged by your cousin, and occasionally supervised by a monk with strong opinions about eye contact. You find yourself standing in a muddy village square, surrounded by thatched roofs and the distant sound of a lute playing something vaguely hopeful. There's a faint breeze, thick with the scent of wood smoke, baked onions, and whatever lavender perfume the apothecary whipped up last Tuesday. It's technically spring, which means mud and flirting season have both arrived in full force. The first thing to understand? Dating, as you know it, simply doesn't exist. There are no dinner and a movie setups here. No swiping, no texting, you up, in the dark? In fact, the entire concept of casual romance is about as foreign to medieval folks as Wi-Fi or oat milk. Romantic relationships fall into two main categories: the kind your family carefully orchestrates with the precision of a 14th century cattle auction, and the kind that happens behind barns and often ends in scandal, poetry, or both. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening somewhere interesting, like curled up in a castle ruin or just hiding from your roommate's lute practice, drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander further into the village. A few people glance up as you pass: women in wool tunics carrying baskets, boys in leggings that leave little to the imagination, and elders who are definitely judging everyone's prospects from behind a goose. Welcome to the medieval dating scene. Here, romance begins with very little privacy. If you're lucky, your crush lives within walking distance, and their family only mildly disapproves of yours. Maybe you grew up together. Maybe you saw each other at the annual May Day festivities and locked eyes over a suspiciously large turnip. Flirtation is subtle. It's in the way a lad lingers too long while handing you firewood. The way a girl, accidentally, drops her spindle and lets you pick it up. Sometimes it's just standing next to each other at church and trying not to make eye contact for fear the local priest will assume a wedding must follow. The mood? It's romantic in the least sexy way imaginable. Historians still argue whether medieval couples felt romantic love the way we do, or whether it was all just practical alliances with a sprinkle of attraction if you were lucky. There's certainly evidence of tenderness, especially in the surviving letters between spouses, but the concept of marrying purely for love was still the exception rather than the expectation. Still, people did fall for each other. And when they did, it could cause serious problems. Like, actual problems, legal problems, but we'll get there later. In the meantime, the tone of romance varies by class. If you're a peasant, love is local, humble, and often tangled up with chores. You help someone mend a fence, and suddenly there's gossip. You get caught smiling in the same direction twice, and your aunt is already embroidering your wedding shirt. Also, don't expect a lot of alone time. Dating often happens in groups, at feasts, at the market, during sheep shearing festivals. Nothing says budding romance like a strong lanolin scent. If you're nobility, things get stranger. You've probably been betrothed since age 7 to a cousin you've never met who lives in another shire. But that doesn't stop you from writing angsty poetry or sighing dramatically on balconies. Courtly love becomes a trend, a highly formalized, slightly ridiculous way of expressing desire that involves knights pining for married noblewomen and expressing their longing through bad lute music and symbolic glove handling. One thing almost all medieval dating has in common? It's slow, impressively slow. Courting someone might take years, or at least a few seasonal harvests. And in many cases, it's not really up to the couple at all, it's a team sport. Your family, your priest, your social standing, even the weather might have something to say about it. And then, there's the issue of consent, something medieval society had a complicated relationship with. While many individuals clearly expressed personal desires, marriages were often negotiated by families, sometimes without much input from the people getting married. And yet, there are also surprising stories, of women rejecting suitors, of men pleading for a beloved's hand, and of communities stepping in to support or resist a match. It's messy, it's contradictory, it's very, very human. As you stroll through this medieval landscape, you notice a young couple pretending not to notice each other while stacking firewood on opposite ends of the same pile. That's practically a proposal around here. Behind them, an older woman is quietly muttering something under her breath and nodding toward the pair. She's either blessing the union, or placing a minor curse to keep things interesting. You can't help but smile. Romance, even in its muddiest form, endures. And now that you've soaked in the general vibe, let's zoom in a little closer. Because in the next section, we're going to talk about what happens when your parents, your priest, and your town crier all try to chaperone your first crush. And yes, there will be fan language, dancing around trees, and maybe an awkward kiss behind a cart. You wander through the village, the smell of damp straw underfoot and roasted barley drifting from a distant kitchen. A cock crows unhelpfully late. Somewhere nearby, someone is playing a flute badly, which, to your surprise, turns out to be a form of flirting. Welcome to the world of chaperoned crushes, where every step toward romance is a public event and privacy is as mythical as dragons. In this little corner of medieval society, if you've caught feelings, your best option is to do something useful near the person you like. Maybe you offer to carry a bucket. Maybe you volunteer to help them thresh grain, though you don't actually know what threshing grain involves and spend most of the time hitting it gently with a stick while sneaking glances. The stakes are high, but not in the way you'd expect. If you're caught alone together too often, or looking too interested, it could result in gossip, accusations, or, in some cases, pressure to marry. Which brings us to the chaperone. Usually, it's someone's mother, or an aunt, or a neighbor who just happened to be passing by, and now stands between you and your would-be sweetheart like a wool-clad guardian angel with a suspiciously accurate memory. Sometimes, it's less formal. Whole communities chaperone. A group of friends might gather and let the two of you walk near the edge of the circle while pretending not to watch. Except they're definitely watching, and quietly rating your chemistry like it's a traveling minstrel show. This communal oversight may sound oppressive, but it comes from a practical place. In tight-knit communities where reputation is everything, love gone wrong doesn't just hurt feelings. It can disrupt the social web like a poorly baked loaf collapsing at the feast. So, if you want a moment of privacy, your best bet is a group event. Enter the village festival. Midsummer fairs, saints' days, and planting feasts are dating goldmines. There's music, dancing, food, and, crucially, enough crowd density to steal a brief conversation away from prying eyes. At the maypole, young men and women dance in long ribbons, weaving in and out in complex patterns designed mostly to confuse anyone trying to eavesdrop. You lock eyes with someone across the circle. They smile, you smile, then you both immediately pretend to focus on your ribbon pattern like it's a sacred text. Historians still argue whether these dances were formal courtship rituals or just popular community entertainment, but there's no doubt they gave people the rare chance to mix socially and scope out potential matches in semi-sanctioned ways. Even more promising? The matchmaking games. At some festivals, there were singing contests where suitors had to serenade their crushes, publicly, of course. Some girls gave prizes. A garland, a ribbon, or in one charmingly weird case from Northern Europe, a very small pie. One unusual tradition from some parts of France involved tossing apples during dances. If someone caught your apple and didn't immediately throw it at your face, it meant they were at least mildly interested. Apple flirting. Nutritious and emotionally confusing. And then, there's the infamous glove drop. In some noble households, a woman could signal interest by, accidentally, dropping a glove or handkerchief while walking past her target. If he picked it up and returned it, that meant he was open to pursuing the connection. Of course, if he stepped over it and kept walking, well, you'd probably spend the next few days sighing dramatically and composing ballads about betrayal. Sometimes, a fan was involved. In warmer climates or more stylized courts, women carried folding fans whose position or flutter pattern could signal approval, boredom, or the medieval equivalent of, text me never. Naturally, the person you're into might not pick up on these signals. Or they might, and simply ignore them because they're too nervous, too betrothed, or just really focused on that sheep shearing competition. This is where family often steps in. You see a father and son chatting just out of earshot from a flax vendor. They're not buying flax. They're scanning the eligible girls and ranking dowries like it's draft day. In peasant villages, marriages could be negotiated informally, sometimes as casually as one parent asking another over ale, "So, what do you think of our kids tying the knot next spring?" But more often than not, courting required careful maneuvering. You had to show interest without stepping too far. And you had to impress, not just your crush, but everyone they're related to. You notice a boy presenting a girl's father with a particularly fat chicken. It clucks nervously in a basket as the father inspects it. The chicken is, apparently, acceptable. This sort of gesture was common. Tokens of good faith, small gifts of food or labor. Maybe you repaired someone's thatch roof, or sharpened their tools, or brought a jug of especially nice cider. Because in medieval times, flirting wasn't just about attraction. It was about being useful. Love was a team sport, and often, the team wore aprons and smelled faintly of turnips. Historians still puzzle over how often real affection bloomed in these arrangements. Was it all transactional, or did feelings quietly grow after months of communal labor and stolen glances across the village green? Evidence suggests both. There are records of couples who petitioned the church to marry for love, even when their parents disapproved. And there are letters, scraps of poetry, and personal accounts hinting at deep, enduring affection between people who truly chose one another. So maybe that boy offering the chicken has a shot. You watch as the father nods slowly. The girl blushes. The boy stammers something about helping with firewood next week. And just like that, a tiny medieval romance takes root. And as for you, don't worry. In the next section, we're heading to the castles, where noble courtship is even more dramatic, filled with poetic agony, tiny daggers, and the world's slowest waltz of unspoken feelings. You leave behind the muddy lanes and sheepish glances of village life and head uphill, where the air is crisper, the sleeves are wider, and the courtship significantly more theatrical. The castle gates creak open with the usual flair for drama, and inside lies a world where dating is less about farming compatibility and more about delivering a heartfelt soliloquy, in full armor. Welcome to the noble class, where flirtation wears silk, rides a destrier, and carries a lute just in case someone needs to be serenaded before supper. You stroll into the great hall, where a fire crackles in the hearth and a handful of nobles lounge on carved wooden chairs that are somehow both grand and uncomfortable. A tapestry depicts someone slaying a dragon, or possibly just overcooking dinner, it's hard to tell. In the corner, a young knight practices looking wistfully at a window while reciting a verse about a lady's elbows. Apparently, they're like moonlight on milk. This is courtly love. The rules of courtly love were famously outlined in a kind of medieval dating manual called The Art of Courtly Love, allegedly written by Andreas Capellanus in the 12th century. Though the book reads like a mix of satire and genuine confusion, its ideas became oddly influential. Among them, true love is ennobling, often painful, and, importantly, should remain unconsummated. In other words, the best kind of love was the one you couldn't actually act on. So instead of confessing your feelings directly, you drop hints. And not subtle ones. There are sighs, there are glances, there are poems comparing your beloved to roses, falcons, and occasionally onions. You might send her a handkerchief with a single embroidered daisy on it. If she wears it at the next tournament, it means she noticed. Or it means she had nothing else clean. Either way, hope springs eternal. You spot a lady walking across the courtyard, trailing 10 feet of embroidered hem and followed by 2 attendants, a lapdog, and what may be a confused goat. She catches your gaze for exactly 0.3 seconds. That's basically a marriage proposal. If you're lucky, she responds by dropping her glove in your path. You pick it up and tuck it into your sleeve. Everyone pretends not to notice, but internally, they're composing ballads. Historians still argue whether courtly love ever translated into real relationships. Was it all a game? Was it an emotional outlet in a world where marriages were arranged and feelings weren't prioritized? Or did some of these longing-filled sonnets actually lead to candlelit trysts and handfasted unions? Evidence suggests that for many nobles, courtly love was both performance and possibility. It allowed emotional expression in a world of duty. And let's be honest, who hasn't written terrible poetry when they were in love? Speaking of terrible poetry, you wander into the solar, where a young squire is struggling through a sonnet. The rhymes are questionable, something about heart and cart. A nearby servant coughs politely, possibly to cover laughter. Still, the effort is earnest. Flirtation among nobles often came with performances, music, dance, even tournaments. Knights would dedicate their combat to a lady, wearing her colors or initials on their shields. Winning a joust while carrying someone's ribbon was basically the 14th century equivalent of tagging your crush in an Instagram post with a heart emoji. And the drama didn't stop at tournaments. You might send your beloved a love token, perhaps a ring, a lock of hair, or a small, impossibly ornate box that serves no practical purpose. If she sends something back, even a pinecone, you treasure it forever. You probably name your horse after her. Meanwhile, the lady is under no obligation to reciprocate. In fact, one of the central rules of courtly love is that the lady always holds the upper hand. She may encourage you, she may ignore you, she may issue a test of devotion that involves riding to a distant monastery and fetching a relic, or composing a love song in 3 languages while standing in a fountain. All of which you'll do, enthusiastically, because courtly love isn't about efficiency. It's about longing. But here's the secret. Sometimes, the rules got bent. Letters exchanged under candlelight, secret meetings in garden alcoves, a brief touch of hands beneath a banquet table. Not all courtly love remained chaste. Despite the lofty ideals, people remained, well, people. And castles had a lot of dark corners. You sit down on a stone bench overlooking the training yard. A knight rides by, dramatically brandishing a ribbon tied to his spear. He nearly falls off, but manages to recover with a heroic twirl. Across the yard, the lady he's trying to impress doesn't even glance up. She's busy petting her lapdog, who looks mildly offended by all the commotion. Love is hard, even when you're rich. And it's not always fair. Not everyone gets to participate in the theatrics. The rules of courtly love largely excluded servants, widows, and anyone whose bloodline didn't have a sufficiently confusing family tree. Still, there are quiet stories, between ladies in waiting and young clerks, between squires and stable girls. Love, whispered beneath the pageantry. And every once in a while, courtly love sparked a real romance, even a marriage, though usually only when it didn't interfere with political alliances or dowries. You watch as dusk settles over the castle. Torches flicker to life, the court musicians begin a slow tune, and couples gather in pairs to dance a stately circle. Everyone pretends it's not romantic, but you can see the small smiles, the hesitations, the brief brushes of hands. In the end, even nobility couldn't escape the universal truth. Whether you're in a village square or a marble-floored hall, love finds a way to make you awkward. But before we get too swept up in gowns and lute songs, let's take a detour to a place where romance unfolded not in person, but on paper. Because next, we're entering the world of medieval love letters and painfully earnest parchment-based poetry. You leave the torch-lit grandeur of the castle ballroom behind, stepping instead into a quieter chamber. A writing desk waits near a stained glass window, its panes glowing with the faintest early light. Quills rest in inkwells, rolls of parchment are stacked like scroll cakes in the corner. This is where things get truly romantic, or truly awkward, depending on your handwriting. Welcome to the world of medieval love letters. You sit down at the desk. There's a half-finished note in front of you. It starts, "To my dearest jewel of the dawn," and ends, "I remain your most humbled servant in fire and frost." It's unclear whether this is a marriage proposal or a weather report, but the sentiment is undeniable. Letter writing was one of the only ways lovers could express themselves freely in a world where their conversations were often overheard, or outlawed. Especially for noble or separated couples, parchment and ink became the lifeline of romance. And while the vocabulary was ornate, the emotions were often very real. You carefully unroll another letter, this one from a young woman to her absent fiancé. She writes about how the wind reminds her of his voice, which, frankly, sounds both poetic and a little unsettling, how she's kept his ribbon safe, and how her parents are growing suspicious of the chickens she keeps sending as messengers. Historians still argue whether these letters were primarily performative or deeply personal. Many surviving examples blend both, grand declarations of loyalty, mixed with little notes about sore feet or how the sheep escaped again. It turns out, even in the middle of romantic agony, there's laundry to fold. You reach for another parchment. This one is full of poems. Bad ones, rhymes like heart and depart, rose and woes, fair and hair. It's from a young knight named Joffrey who, based on the quality of his metaphors, should absolutely not quit his day job. Still, the effort is sweet. He describes the color of his lady's eyes as stormy wheat, which makes no botanical sense but is clearly sincere. He signs it, "Forever wounded by thy gaze." Gee, it's easy to laugh, but in a world without instant messaging, or even a reliable postal system, writing took time, energy, and a certain level of emotional courage. You didn't just jot something down and hit send. You had to craft it. Consider every word, worry about your penmanship, hope it survived the trip via donkey, boat, or your cousin's overly talkative apprentice. Delivery systems were mixed. If you were lucky, you had a trusted go-between, maybe a squire, a friend, or a maid who secretly thought your romance was better than any troubadour song. If not, you risked passing notes in church or tying them to pigeons, a method historians are still debating because, frankly, pigeons are terrible at romance. Some letters never reached their destination. Some were intercepted by suspicious parents, jealous rivals, or bored siblings who couldn't resist a little drama. One famous case involved a letter smuggled in a hollowed-out loaf of bread, which sounds clever until you remember that medieval rats were highly literate and extremely nosy. But the tradition of writing endured. In monasteries, monks and nuns sometimes exchanged spiritual letters that veered suspiciously close to romantic prose. "Your soul is my candlelight," wrote one nun to her fellow sister in cloth. Historians still debate whether that's divine and flirty. Some rulers kept entire collections of correspondence, which today serve as treasure troves for historians. Eleanor of Aquitaine reportedly received poems from admirers across Europe. Her husband, Henry II, was less thrilled, though it's unclear whether it was the volume of suitors or the fact that they wrote better Latin. You wander deeper into the study and notice a small chest filled with tokens, rings, buttons, even a carved bone hairpin. These were often included in letters, tiny gifts meant to carry affection across distance. Sometimes they came with perfume, which often smelled like herbs or boiled animal fat. Sometimes, just a pressed flower. Of course, love letters weren't always sweet. Some included complaints, accusations, guilt trips so intense they'd make a modern breakup text look like a thank you note. One disgruntled lady writes, "Thou saidst thy heart was mine, yet I saw thee dancing thrice with Margaret." She then calls Margaret a goose-footed hussy, which might be the most underrated insult in history. Still, these moments reflect a universal truth: communication is hard. Whether you're carving your feelings into birch bark or frantically rewording a message for the 15th time before it's carried to the next village, it's easy to feel misunderstood. That's what makes the successful exchanges so touching. Like the young merchant who sent letters home from a trade voyage, each one ending with, "I kiss the space where your hand once rested on the breadboard," which is both oddly specific and kind of adorable. Eventually, you sit back, ink-stained and thoughtful. Maybe you've written something yourself. A declaration? A question? A quiet message you'll never send? Because even now, in this drafty little room with its waxy candles and paper cuts waiting to happen, the impulse is the same: to tell someone how you feel, even if the words come out crooked. But before you get too caught up in wistful penmanship and poetic metaphors about sheep, let's head somewhere livelier. Because next, we're going to the fair, the festival grounds, where love is loud, messy, musical, and occasionally covered in pastry crumbs. The scent hits you first: honeyed pastries, roasted meat on spits, and something fried that probably shouldn't be. The clamor of a traveling fair rolls through the fields like a living, chaotic heartbeat. You follow the sound of lutes, the creak of wagon wheels, and the unmistakable laughter of someone being mildly humiliated in a game involving cabbages. Welcome to the medieval fair, a place where love gets loud, laughter gets muddy, and half the town pretends they're not here just to ogle each other behind barrels of ale. The market square is a riot of color. Bright ribbons flap in the wind, chickens dart between feet, and someone is loudly claiming to have invented invisible ink. It's likely just water, but no one's here for scientific breakthroughs. They're here to mingle. If the noble courts were about longing glances and tragic poetry, the fairgrounds are all about sweaty palms, stolen cider, and dances that may or may not involve flinging someone into a haystack. It's here that medieval dating gets its most democratic. No titles, no betrothal contracts, just a juggler, a maypole, and a faint chance at finding someone who thinks your tunic is kind of cool. At the center of the square, the maypole rises like a slightly confused flagpole, strung with long, colorful ribbons. The dance is a local tradition. Each participant takes a ribbon and follows a weaving pattern set to music, spiraling in and out like a gentle, flirtatious tangle. It's equal parts choreography and social chess. You pick up a ribbon. The person next to you smiles, a baker's daughter, maybe, or a smith's apprentice. You weave past each other, fingers brushing just once. Then again, then not so accidentally again. Sparks, or maybe just static from the wool. Historians still debate the original purpose of maypole dances. Some say it's a pagan fertility ritual that the church tolerated with mild grumpiness. Others argue it was just a way to get people moving after a long winter. Either way, it became a common courtship setting, one of the few socially acceptable places for boys and girls to interact without being immediately married or excommunicated. You spot other classic fair flirtations happening all around you. There's a group playing Hoodman Blind, which is basically blind man's bluff but with more giggling and the occasional attempt to peek from under the hood. Two teens pretend to throw apples at each other, then immediately apologize and offer the apples as peace offerings. Which is 100% a medieval, I like you, move. And over by the booth with the duck-shaped bread, No one knows why. A boy is trying very hard to impress someone with his juggling skills. He drops a turnip, catches a second one, and pretends the mistake was part of the routine. It was not, but the girl laughs anyway. Success. Music plays constantly. Minstrels strum instruments that are half flute, half barnyard accident, and couples dance in clumsy circles, feet pounding the packed dirt with joyful rhythm. Dances are fast, looping, and loud, designed less for elegance and more for proximity. You twirl, you laugh, you try not to step on your partner's foot, fail, and apologize profusely while pretending it was their fault. One fringe tradition involves fortune tellers. You duck into a tent where an old woman squints at your palm, traces your lifeline, and declares, you will marry someone with good teeth. Given the time period, that narrows it down to approximately 6 people in the entire shire. Still, it's good news. Some festivals feature contests: archery, wrestling, cheese rolling, and, famously, catch the greased pig. The winner often gets a ribbon or a pie. In one known case, the prize was an unsolicited marriage proposal. She said yes, then made him chase a second pig to prove it wasn't a fluke. Fairs aren't just for flirting, they're for feasting, storytelling, and showing off. A boy might gift a girl a gingerbread heart. A girl might slip a sprig of herbs into someone's belt as a token. These gestures are small, sweet, and easily deniable if things go sideways. Romantic insurance, if you will. And let's not forget the role of music. Ballads about love, tragic, triumphant, or extremely exaggerated, fill the air. One troubadour sings of a knight who fell in love with a miller's daughter after she rescued him from a wheel of cheese. Historians are still unsure if this was allegorical or just extremely niche. You stop to listen, leaning against a fence made entirely of borrowed wagon wheels. The music blends into the sound of laughter, clinking mugs, and the thump of someone falling over during a spoon-balancing race. Everything smells faintly of mead and victory. Of course, not all fair romances go smoothly. There are jealous glances, dramatic sighs, someone gets snubbed during the ribbon dance and retreats to sulk behind a cabbage cart. Another boy gives a girl a pie she's clearly allergic to, leading to a very polite rejection and a long, awkward silence. Still, fairs are forgiving places. There's always another dance, another song, another round of honey cakes to win someone over. You take one last look at the festivities. Couples link arms and walk toward the field's edge, lanterns flickering softly as twilight rolls in. There's a sweetness to it all, a fleeting magic, gone by sunrise. And as the fair fades behind you, you start to wonder, what happens when flirting isn't enough? When love gets serious, when, perhaps, someone invents a weird piece of metal underwear to keep things chaste. Because in the next section, we're taking on one of the most famously misunderstood, and definitely most uncomfortable, topics in medieval romance, the chastity belt. You climb a narrow spiral staircase, footsteps echoing in the quiet stone corridor. The fair is long behind you now, its laughter faded into memory and pastry crumbs, and ahead lies something far more peculiar. Tucked away in a drafty upper chamber is a wooden chest, slightly open, glinting with something metallic inside. You peek in. Ah, yes, the chastity belt, the most infamous piece of medieval dating gear, and one that immediately makes you shift uncomfortably in your imagination. The object gleams dully, a complicated thing of iron loops, leather straps, and enough locks to confuse a locksmith. Now, before you get too caught up picturing some poor damsel hobbling through her day in an iron corset, let's pause. Historians still argue whether chastity belts were ever actually used, or if they were more of a joke, a myth, or an elaborate warning sign for would-be suitors. You lift the belt gingerly. It's heavy, clunky, the kind of thing that would chafe within 5 steps, let alone a full day at the embroidery circle. It has all the subtlety of a bear trap and none of the elegance one might hope for in romantic armor. And yet, the chastity belt persists in the collective imagination, thanks mostly to later centuries' fascination with the strange customs of the Middle Ages. Victorians, in particular, loved to point at medieval chastity belts as proof that earlier people were very silly and probably needed more moral guidance, while secretly being weirdly obsessed themselves. The oldest known physical examples date from the 15th century, but most were likely made as satirical gifts, display pieces, or museum curiosities. Many include comically impractical features, like built-in spikes or impossible buckles. In short, they weren't made to be worn, unless the wearer was also extremely stationary and immune to tetanus. Still, stories about chastity belts circulated with gusto. In some versions, knights heading off to crusades would lock up their wives and hand the key to a trusted friend. This plan immediately backfires in the story, because, surprise, the friend isn't that trustworthy. The result is always some poetic justice or ironic twist, depending on the storyteller's mood. Other tales feature kings, jealous merchants, or overzealous fathers using chastity belts to protect women from unwanted attention. Whether these stories were meant to be taken seriously or just played for laughs is unclear, but they certainly reflect deeper anxieties of the time: trust, honor, temptation, and the eternal worry that your spouse might get bored while you're busy besieging a castle somewhere in Antioch. Of course, even without belts made of literal iron, the idea of controlling women's sexuality was baked deeply into medieval society. You step over to a set of manuscripts, laid out like awkward love letters from a time before emojis. Here, the Church's teachings are clear: chastity is virtue, and desire must be properly managed, ideally with prayer, woolen garments, and exactly zero alone time. One popular text advises couples to avoid excessive embraces, and recommends separate beds, even after marriage. Another charming piece warns women against mirrors, dancing, and the wearing of colored shoes, because nothing stirs up sin like stylish footwear. Still, medieval people weren't robots. They had feelings, desires. They found creative ways around the rules. They carved little hearts into trees, arranged accidental meetings at wells, and slipped notes into hymnals. And not everyone agreed on what was appropriate. One group of 14th-century scholars argued that mutual love made passion acceptable. Another group responded with a 30-page rebuttal titled, roughly translated, "No it doesn't, you heathens." Meanwhile, poets had a field day. There are entire medieval ballads dedicated to the folly of the chastity belt. One famous poem tells the story of a clever blacksmith's daughter who tricks her father into giving her the key, then buries it somewhere he'll never find. The last line involves a wink, a jug of wine, and what sounds like a very successful date night. You glance again at the belt in your hands. It's strange, it's a little ridiculous, but in its own way, it tells a deeper truth about the discomfort societies have long had with intimacy, agency, and trust. About the difference between protection and control, and about how much easier it is to lock something up than to talk about it. Of course, real relationships couldn't be locked in a box. You imagine a noblewoman, maybe, forced to wear a symbolic belt while secretly rolling her eyes so hard it causes a breeze. She knows it's theater. She knows she's the one actually holding the key, metaphorically, if not literally. Because despite the heavy metal pageantry, power in medieval romance often played out in subtler ways. Through words, choices, glances, and the occasional sassy embroidery. Remember that girl at the fair who rejected the boy with the pie? She didn't need a belt. She just needed a sentence: "I'm allergic to apples, actually." Boom. Boundaries set. You place the chastity belt back in its chest, close the lid gently, and step away. We've examined the myth. Now let's explore something a little softer. Because in the next section, we're heading to the countryside to visit young lovers meeting in secret, behind hedgerows, beside rivers, under starlit skies. It's time for quiet escapes, whispered promises, and the low-stakes rebellion of hand-holding in the moonlight. The wooden chest creaks closed behind you as you descend a gently sloping hill, away from stone walls and clanging belts, towards something simpler. Quieter, the kind of love that doesn't involve tournaments, parchment poetry, or restrictive metal undergarments. You walk through dew-damp fields, the moon hanging soft and round in the night sky. A hedgerow rustles nearby. Somewhere, a nightingale sings a note too perfect to be accidental. Welcome to the secret meetings of countryside sweethearts, where dating is equal parts romance and mud. In villages across medieval Europe, far from courts and castles, love bloomed in hedgerows, pastures, barns, and riverbanks. These were places beyond the prying eyes of parents, priests, and nosy neighbors, natural hideaways for whispered promises and tentative touches. You duck under a low branch and come across a pair of mossy stones worn smooth by generations of clandestine chats. This isn't just scenery, this is history's quietest dating bench. Here, the rules are looser. Love isn't written in sonnets. It's carved into bark, etched into fence posts, passed along in bundles of herbs. A daisy chain means, "I'm thinking of you." A garland of rosemary? That's more serious. Sage and thyme? Well, you're practically engaged. Historians still debate just how often these rustic rendezvous led to lifelong partnerships, accidental engagements, or the occasional small scandal involving a haystack. What's clear is that these moments mattered. They gave young people a taste of choice in a world where choice was scarce. In one English village, records show that a young woman was seen meeting the same boy, oft beneath the east-facing gate, for 5 summers running. She eventually married someone else entirely, but her linen chest was found lined with tiny dried violets. Love doesn't always win, but it often lingers. You move deeper into the meadow, brushing past fireflies and soft tufts of clover. 2 silhouettes appear by a tree. The boy in a linen shirt with one sleeve rolled up, the girl in a rough woven dress, her braids slightly crooked. They're not speaking, just holding hands, breathing the same air. It's quiet, it's awkward, it's kind of perfect. Medieval dating wasn't without its tension, of course. Especially for lower classes, where economic stability and family reputation held immense weight. Still, many families tolerated a certain amount of walking out, or courting, before formal arrangements were made. As long as nothing too scandalous happened, and as long as no one ended up in the bishop's records, it was often winked at. One popular custom involved bundling, a practice where 2 young people were allowed to sleep in the same bed, fully clothed, usually with a board between them, and under strict instructions to behave. Sometimes the couple were tied into bed sacks. Nothing says romance like a human burrito with trust issues. Historians still argue whether bundling was a practical way to build intimacy before engagement, or just the world's least effective form of temptation avoidance. Either way, it happened. And judging by population records, sometimes it worked. Other times, well, let's just say baptisms followed swiftly after weddings. But back to the fields. The countryside wasn't just a backdrop for secret meetings, it was a character in the romance. Lovers took long walks to the edges of estates, exchanged riddles across stone fences, and waited beneath certain trees known locally as love oaks. These trees, massive, patient, older than anyone in the village, were often believed to grant blessings to young couples who kissed beneath them. Or at least didn't tattle. You walk past one now, its trunk gnarled like old knuckles, its roots wrapped around small tokens, ribbons, pebbles, a single broken comb. Little offerings to memory, or hope, and let's not ignore the creative lengths people went to for privacy. One couple in southern France is rumored to have developed an elaborate code involving sheep bells. If she rang hers twice and paused, he knew the coast was clear. 3 rings meant, my brother is watching. 4, go home, I'm knitting socks. Another pair in rural Italy used a system of chalk marks on the village well. A circle meant, meet me tonight. A triangle meant, I'm grounded. A smiley face meant, the 14th century has just invented emojis. The love here isn't flashy. There's no lute music, no embroidered gloves, but there is sincerity. There is mud on your shoes and thorns in your sleeve. And there is that breathless hush when someone reaches for your hand in the dark and doesn't let go. You pause by a small stream, its surface lit by moonlight like poured silver. A couple sits beside it, passing a crust of bread back and forth. It's not a feast, but it is shared, and that's enough. And then there's the bittersweet truth. Not all secret lovers get their happy ending. Families intervene, marriages are arranged, one leaves for war, one moves to another village. They meet again years later at a fair, both holding hands with someone else, and nod politely with a smile that says, I remember. Still, these stolen moments matter. They carry forward in songs, in family tales, in the names of fields that used to mean something only to 2 people in love. You rise from the meadow and shake the grass from your cloak. Love in the fields has left its mark, muddy, messy, magical. But now, let's return to the town, because not all love stories happened outside. Some played out right inside the home, long after the dating phase ended. Yes, next, we're stepping into the realm of marriage, arranged unions, hopeful beginnings, and what passed for date night. Once you were officially stuck together until death, or dysentery, did you part. The village fades behind you, the hedgerows gently swaying in your memory. You follow the cobbled path back toward the bustle of everyday life, past the blacksmith's forge, past a shop that smells like cabbage and regret, and into the quiet hum of domestic life. Tonight, you're stepping across the threshold of a medieval home. It's not a castle, not a peasant's hut, but something in between, a modest timber-framed dwelling where the wooden beams creak just loud enough to make every private conversation mildly public. Inside, the hearth is warm. A pot bubbles gently, a candle flickers, and beside the fire sit 2 people who once courted in the meadows, maybe danced at a fair, maybe met because their parents told them to, and now? Now they're married. This is the next stage of medieval love, the married life. The long haul, the till death do you both develop cholera journey. But let's rewind for a moment. In medieval Europe, marriage wasn't always about love. It was about land, lineage, livestock, and legitimacy. For the noble classes, marriage was basically a property deal with fancy clothes. Dowries changed hands, estates expanded, families merged like feudal franchises. For common folk, things were simpler, but still strategic. You married someone from the next village over because their field bordered yours. Or because their father made decent ale. Or because your parents arranged it when you were both still wearing mismatched shoes. But here's the thing. Love could grow from these arrangements. And sometimes, it already existed before the paperwork. You sit at the table now, across from your spouse. They smile tiredly after a long day of wool spinning or bread baking or arguing with geese. There's no music, no poetry, no knights slaying dragons. Just shared soup and a sigh that says, well, we didn't die today. Historians still debate how often medieval marriages were emotionally fulfilling. Letters from the time show a mix of devotion, frustration, resignation, and humor. One 14th-century husband called his wife, "my most beloved torment," which sounds like a punk album but was likely affectionate. In fact, some couples seemed genuinely fond of each other. One famous example is John of Gaunt and Catherine Swynford, whose long love affair eventually became a legitimate marriage. Their letters, though formal, brim with mutual respect and oddly touching details, like shared jokes about clumsy squires and ill-tempered horses. Then there's the daily routine. You wake up on a straw mattress, shoulder to shoulder with your beloved and probably a few children, a dog, and at least one chicken who's decided this is its bed now. You rise with the sun, because sleeping in wasn't an option, and begin the day's work. Married life was a partnership. One stirred the pot, the other hauled water. One milked goats, the other fixed the roof. One recited prayers, the other tried to keep the fire going with damp wood. Romance looked less like serenades and more like quietly saving the good piece of bread for your spouse. Privacy? Nearly non-existent. Many households consisted of a single room. You cooked, ate, slept, and argued all in the same space, usually within earshot of curious children and judgmental neighbors. And yet, affection found its way in. You hear a couple bicker softly over turnips. Then one leans in to tuck a curl of hair behind the other's ear. A silent truce. Later, they both laugh at the same silly riddle their daughter tells for the 5th time. You start to realize, intimacy isn't always passionate, it's repetitive. Familiar, kind. Now, not every marriage was smooth. There were disagreements, power struggles, spouses who wandered, emotionally or physically. One historical account involves a husband who left for fish and returned 4 winters later, married to another. Another mentions a wife who baked her feelings into extremely pointed pies. Still, many worked it out. Through forgiveness, through routine, through the medieval version of couples therapy, which was usually just a neighbor telling you to stop yelling and share your cheese like grown adults. Customs varied across cultures. In Scandinavia, marriages could be annulled if the couple didn't enjoy each other's company, though defining enjoyment was tricky. In Islamic courts, women sometimes had more legal options for divorce than their Christian counterparts. And in parts of West Africa, matrilineal traditions meant property and marital decisions followed the mother's line, giving women more autonomy than in many European systems. In all these societies, love coexisted with practicality. Sometimes it blossomed slowly, like moss on a stone wall. Sometimes it sparked early and flickered. And sometimes it was simply a gentle agreement to walk through life together, side by side, even when one of you insisted on storing onions under the bed. And yes, there were romantic gestures. A husband might carve a comb for his wife. A wife might embroider a symbol into his tunic. In one known case, a man wrote a prayer for his wife's safety every morning before he left to harvest grain. He couldn't read, but he memorized it, line by line. The fire crackles beside you. Your spouse reaches over and hands you the last bit of stew-soaked bread. You eat in silence, comfortable in the quiet rhythm of your life together. And as the candle burns low and the room darkens, you lie back on your shared mattress, surrounded by the creaks of the house, the muffled sounds of the village, and the heartbeat of a marriage that might not be perfect, but is real. Now, not all love ends here. Some people lose their partners. Some never marry. Some fall in love later, stranger, or softer than they expected. And some go to church to sort it all out. So next, we're lighting a few devotional candles and slipping into the pews. Because the church had plenty to say about your love life, and not all of it was particularly helpful. The bells toll gently above you, echoing through the stone nave of a quiet church. You step onto the cool flagstone floor, lit by shafts of colored light that filter through old, uneven stained glass. The incense clings to the air like memory, and the flicker of candle flames dances along the walls like ghostly parishioners. This is where love comes to be judged, blessed, and occasionally overanalyzed. Welcome to the church's perspective on medieval relationships. Now, before you panic, no one's here to shame you for that harmless maypole flirtation or that midnight riverbank rendezvous. But let's just say the church was very, very interested in what people were doing with their hearts, and with the rest of their bodies, too. You slide into a wooden pew that's seen better centuries. It creaks ominously under your weight, as if trying to warn you about dating someone with a suspiciously flexible interpretation of Lent. To understand the church's influence on medieval love, you first need to accept that it was everywhere. Birth, death, marriage, confession, every key life moment passed through its doors. And love? Love was considered noble, but dangerous. Like a beautiful candle held far too close to the drapes. Marriage was officially a sacrament by the 12th century, meaning it was blessed by God and monitored closely by those in robes. But it didn't have to happen in a church, not yet. In fact, many medieval marriages began with nothing more than an exchange of vows in front of a couple witnesses and maybe a chicken or two. The church eventually pushed for more regulation, public ceremonies, clergy involvement, bans on consanguinity, so, no marrying your cousin's cousin's cousin. And, of course, lots of rules about when not to marry, Advent, Lent, feast days, fasting days, days with a Y in them. The list was long. You hear the creak of a confessional door. No one's calling you in, but many young lovers would have passed through here, whispering their sins to a weary priest trying not to roll his eyes at yet another tale of, accidentally, holding hands during Vespers. You kneel at a prayer bench, half out of reverence, half because your legs are tired from all this time travel walking. A scroll of parchment lies nearby, a list of penances handed out for various romantic missteps. Kissed someone you weren't married to? Say 3 Hail Marys. Flirted during Mass? Add fasting on Friday. Lay with another in impure intention. We're gonna need to see you every morning for a month. Historians still debate whether these penances were genuinely feared or more of a polite inconvenience. Some records show serial flirters working their way through dozens of confessions without changing their habits. One priest in Prague reportedly had to create a waiting list for sins of affection, which sounds more like a spa service than a moral crisis. And then there were the saints. Oh, the saints. Every conceivable romantic situation had one. You lose your love? Pray to Saint Valentine, before he was co-opted by greeting cards. Trouble in your marriage? Ask Saint Rita for patience. Suffering from heartbreak? Saint Dwynwen, the Welsh patron of unrequited love, had your back. And for those who decided love wasn't for them, there was the monastic life, cloisters, chants, and absolutely zero ribbon dances. Not everyone who loved did so with the church's blessing, of course. Courtly love, the romantic ideal of the unattainable lady and her suffering poet, was famously at odds with official doctrine. The church liked its marriages neat and sacramental. The troubadours liked their romances tragic, poetic, and usually involving someone else's spouse. You wander toward a side chapel where a fresco shows a knight kneeling at a lady's feet. She's draped in velvet. He's clearly forgotten how heavy armor is. An angel floats above them, looking vaguely judgmental. The artist has captured something subtle here, the tension between earthly desire and divine order. The idea that love might lift you, or distract you, might inspire you to noble deeds, or land you in confession. You glance at the altar. It's simple, candlelit, a few faded flowers. Here, countless couples must have said their vows, not with fanfare, but with quiet certainty. One historical couple, recorded in a 13th century French parish, exchanged their vows before Mass and sealed it with a clasp of hands. The priest nodded, the village cheered quietly, and then they went home to a stew pot and a leaky roof, but together. The church didn't just warn or chide. Sometimes it protected. Women whose husbands disappeared could seek sanctuary and aid. Widows found comfort in religious communities. And in a few exceptional cases, church courts even helped lovers marry against family wishes, if the vows were sincere. But sincerity was key. The church didn't care if you had butterflies or if your spouse made you laugh. They cared if you made a vow, and stuck to it. Break your word, and you weren't just a bad partner, you were a spiritual liability. Still, people found ways to live love, and laugh beneath all that stone and scripture. You light a small candle and watch the flame dance. Maybe someone just like you once sat here, heart full of affection and confusion, wondering what came next. Wondering if love was meant to be divine, or just delightfully human. You stand and stretch quietly, trying not to set off a centuries-old squeaky floorboard. Because next, we're stepping out of this sacred stillness and back into the world of social spectacle. Get ready for feasts, festivals, and the medieval equivalent of a double date that involves too much ale, a lute solo, and probably some goats wearing flower crowns. You ease out of the shadowy quiet of the church and into something a little brighter, a little rowdier, the distant thump of a drum, the smell of roasted meat, and a burst of laughter spilling into the dusk. That's right, tonight, love wears its good shoes and dances till the candle wax runs dry. Welcome to the feast. You arrive just as the musicians are tuning their lutes, their strings plucked experimentally while a jester tries to juggle 3 wooden spoons and a turnip. The long tables are already filling, planks on barrels, rough but sturdy, lined with trenchers of bread, flasks of wine, and enough roasted onions to keep courtship pleasantly slow-paced. This is the medieval equivalent of speed dating, but with more mud and a significantly higher chance of being serenaded by someone who doesn't quite know how to rhyme. Feasts and festivals were key social hubs for courtship. Whether you were a wealthy merchant's daughter or the local cooper's apprentice, these gatherings were rare moments when you could mingle freely, flirt semi-openly, and, if you were lucky, avoid your mother's disapproving eyebrows. You take a seat beside a group of young women, their sleeves rolled up as they challenge each other to a riddle contest. One leans over and whispers that the boy across the table has been eyeing her all week, but he still hasn't figured out how to say, hello, without tripping over his own feet. You glance at the boy. Yep, he's currently pretending to be very interested in a pickled egg. Historians still argue how formal or informal these social flirtations were. Some records show very structured dances, where couples were paired in advance and given topics of conversation, usually, the harvest, or local pig health. Others suggest more relaxed affairs, where flirtation was as natural as breathing, especially after 2 mugs of spiced ale. The food here isn't fancy, but it's plentiful. You tear a chunk of bread from a shared loaf and dip it into something that smells vaguely like lentils and ambition. There's roast chicken, honeyed carrots, and a wheel of cheese that someone carved into a heart shape, then immediately ruined by sitting on it by mistake. It's the thought that counts. Festivals often coincided with saints' days, harvest milestones, or lunar events. These were communal celebrations, but also low-key matchmaking opportunities. Parents might bring eligible sons and daughters and, accidentally, seat them side by side. Priests might make vague announcements about the virtues of holy matrimony right before the music started. And occasionally, someone's goat would run off with someone else's bonnet, sparking a meet-cute no bard could improve upon. You're pulled into a circle of dancers now, hands joined, feet tapping, skirts swirling. It's clumsy, joyful chaos. The dances have names like, the hay, Brannel of the Peasants, or, the one where Thomas always steps on everyone. And yes, Thomas just did. Dancing wasn't just fun, it was practically a flirtation ritual. Many dances required partners to face each other, mirror movements, or exchange quick touches. And while rules were strict, no lingering fingers, please, the excitement was undeniable. One chronicler described a May Day dance where the air thickened with laughter and the scent of young blossoms and mischief. Another claimed that marriages forged during festival dances lasted longer, though this may just be because everyone was too tired to argue afterward. You step aside to catch your breath, and notice a couple seated quietly on the edge of the festivities. He's carving a small token from wood, maybe a spoon, maybe a heart, it's hard to tell. She's humming a tune, tapping her foot in time with the beat. It's the medieval version of a soft launch. Not every romantic gesture at festivals was subtle. Some involved grand declarations, like poems recited aloud, to varying degrees of poetic success, or elaborate games of courtly love where knights pledged to honor a lady by avoiding onions for a whole week. One suitor famously promised to kiss his beloved's shadow every morning until she noticed him. She eventually did, though mostly because he kept tripping over buckets. You nibble on a honey cake and sip something herbal. The night deepens, torches flicker, the music softens. A group of friends begins a game involving riddles and dares. One challenge? Declare your affection to someone using only produce. A boy shyly presents a girl with a beat and says, "Because you make my heart beat faster." The group groans. She blushes. Later, they're seen holding hands behind the ale cart. Even in times of hardship, famine, war, plague, festivals like this brought life back into balance. They reminded people of joy, of connection, of why you might risk your heart on someone who once compared you to a turnip. And while marriage often loomed as the practical destination, these nights were about possibility. The chance to be seen, heard, chosen. Even just for a song. You sit back and watch the dancers spiral like stars in a constellation only this village will remember. The music fades slowly. The firelight casts golden halos around everyone's faces. Someone snores nearby, already dreaming of the girl with the beat. You smile, because next, we're following one of those lucky couples into a slightly different setting, not a feast, not a church, but a market stall. Yes, it's time to explore the romantic chaos of merchant life, where love and trade go hand in hand, and sometimes the hand holds a suspiciously cheap pair of shoes. Morning stirs the town awake. Somewhere, a cockerel crows half-heartedly, and a cart rattles by with one wheel clearly protesting its workload. You blink against the new light, stretch your legs, and stroll into the cobbled heart of medieval domestic commerce, the market. Here, among stalls of woven cloth, pyramids of dried fish, and more apples than a person could sensibly use in a week, medieval romance takes on a different flavor. Welcome to merchant love, a blend of negotiation, survival, and occasionally wooing someone by giving them a slightly less moldy wheel of cheese. You duck beneath a flapping canvas awning and immediately inhale a smell so complex it defies easy description, somewhere between baked goods, sheep, and feet. The stall vendor smiles toothlessly. You nod politely and continue on. Romance awaits, probably not in that particular stall. For many people in medieval towns and cities, especially among artisans and traders, love was tied to livelihood. A good match might mean a shared workshop, expanded inventory, and children who knew how to count to 20 in grain sacks before they could write their names. You pass a couple arguing gently in front of a bolt of wool. She wants the red, he prefers the blue. The vendor is too invested and has started suggesting a tasteful green compromise. Eventually, she gets the red. He pretends it was his idea. True love. Historians still argue how much choice people in the middle classes really had in choosing their spouses. Guild records and tax rolls suggest many matches were made within professional circles, shoemakers marrying the daughters of tanners, coopers wedding weavers. But letters and legal disputes also hint at passion, betrayal, and at least one case of eloping with the competition's apprentice. It's not all fabric and fish, though. You peek around a corner and see a young man standing behind a stall stacked with glazed pottery. A girl strolls up, pretends to be interested in a jug, and says, "How sturdy is this one?" He smiles and replies, "Sturdy enough to survive a dance with you." She raises an eyebrow. Not bad. This kind of marketplace flirtation was common. Coded conversations disguised as haggling, compliments slipped between price negotiations, lingering over fruit not because it was ripe, but because the vendor had nice eyelashes. Even nuns would stop by the market to hear the news, and sometimes, that news involved quite a bit of blushing. You wander into a section of the square where itinerant performers are setting up a puppet show. Children gather. Adults pretend not to watch. The puppets are mid-argument in a play that's half cautionary tale, half romantic farce. One puppet wants to run off with the baker's daughter. The other wants to marry a trout. It's unclear who wins. Markets also hosted seasonal fairs, bigger, louder, and more chaotic cousins to the weekly market. These fairs attracted people from neighboring towns, traveling merchants, and anyone curious about the latest miracle tonic or enchanted shoehorn. At one such fair in Bruges, a love poem contest drew so many entries that the judges reportedly gave up halfway through and awarded the prize to whoever brought the best snacks. You stop at a stall selling carved trinkets, hearts, rings, tiny birds. The woman behind the counter says each one tells a story. You pick up a little wooden box. Inside, someone's etched the words, "To my secret joy." It's dated 1423. You close the lid and feel oddly like you just heard someone whisper across time. Of course, not all merchant romances were sweet. There were rivals who sabotaged each other's stalls, jealous lovers throwing fish at each other, and one infamous case of a merchant who tattooed his girlfriend's name on his arm using red ink, only to find out it spelled Marjorie, when her name was actually Mary. Still, love persevered. It found its way into business ledgers, where one baker always rounded down the price of buns for a certain customer. It crept into apprenticeships, where daughters of masters flirted with boys sanding pewter. It danced between transactions, hidden like a pressed flower in a ledger. One of the most quietly romantic customs? The market gift. A plum, a ribbon, a hand-stitched pouch, small tokens slipped across counters with the change. Not flashy, not expensive, just thought, and occasionally, heartbreak happened right there in the square. A young woman stands at the corner, clutching a small bunch of lavender. She keeps glancing toward the bakery. No one comes out. After a while, she drops the lavender and walks away. The scent lingers. You pick it up and leave it on the nearest bench. Maybe someone else will understand. By late morning, the market buzz reaches its peak. Bells chime, vendors shout, children chase chickens that absolutely do not want to be chased. Somewhere, someone proposes with a loaf of slightly underbaked bread, and somehow, it works. Love in the marketplace isn't perfect. It's messy, crowded, noisy, and often smells like cheese left too long in the sun. But it's real, it's daily, it's shared glances, remembered orders, hands brushing while passing a coin. And while nobles had their fancy poems and secret gardens, this kind of love, practical, hopeful, and sandwiched between errands, might be the most lasting of all. You take one last look at the market. The stalls shimmer in the heat. The laughter carries. And the girl from the pottery stand is now holding hands with the boy from the fruit cart. Well played. Next, we're heading even deeper into the quieter corners of medieval intimacy. To secret letters, symbolic jewelry, and how people really said, "I love you," when they couldn't say it aloud. Get ready for coded hearts, locked boxes, and more symbolism than a Renaissance oil painting. You slip away from the clamor of the marketplace, your ears still echoing with clinking coins and the distant squawk of a chicken who may or may not be in love with someone's shoe. The path you follow now is quieter, stone buildings lining the alley like old confidantes, shadows stretching like ink across worn cobbles. This is the part of medieval love where words whisper instead of shout. Welcome to the world of secret tokens, coded language, and unspoken feelings. Love in the Middle Ages wasn't always declared in grand gestures or church bells. Often, it lived in smaller things. A ribbon tied just so, a song with certain words emphasized, a brooch with a hidden hinge. When you couldn't openly say, "I love you," because your families were feuding, or your social classes didn't match, or because 3 aunts were always eavesdropping, you said it differently. You begin in a modest room lit by late afternoon sunlight. On the table is a folded piece of parchment sealed with a lump of red wax. The message inside? Carefully penned in a slanted hand. Probably copied from a poem, or maybe it's original. Either way, it's written in rhyme. Because if you're going to risk your reputation on a love letter, you may as well add a couplet. Historians still debate how widespread written romance truly was. Literacy was uneven, and ink was precious. But the love letters that survive? They range from heartbreakingly formal to surprisingly spicy. One 15th century lover wrote, "I long to see you as I see the moon's face, distant, but mine in heart." Another just said, "Your hands are cold, but I would still hold them." Tokens were even more common. A ring, a glove, a favor tied to a belt. Each item meant something. A needle threaded with red silk might say, "You've pierced my heart." A small wooden box hinted at locked affection. And if someone gave you a spoon carved with leaves? Well, good luck figuring that one out. It could mean growing affection, or you're great at soup. You pause near a small window and look out over a courtyard where a woman pins something to her cloak. A brooch shaped like a heart pierced by an arrow. Not Cupid's arrow, but a hunting arrow. Love is pursuit, dangerous, possibly muddy. There's a kind of poetry in how people disguised feelings. You stroll through a hall decorated with woven tapestries. One shows a unicorn resting its head in a maiden's lap, widely interpreted as a symbol of purity, or surrender, or frankly just a very clingy unicorn. But to medieval viewers, it was layered with meaning. A gift bearing that image might whisper, "My heart is tamed by you." Not all coded messages were romantic, though. Some were rejections, graceful ways of saying, "It's not you, it's the plague." A woman might return a token wrapped in black ribbon. A man might stop wearing the ring you gave him and claim it fell in the river. The river, it seems, had many regrets to its name. But for those who persisted, symbolic jewelry was everything. You duck into a jeweler's workshop now, tools scattered, tiny gems glinting, a cat asleep in the window. The artisan explains how posy rings, inscribed with brief phrases like, "Forget me not," or, "United we stand," were given in secret or exchanged before official vows. Some were spelled phonetically or written backward to keep nosy neighbors guessing. There's also the feed ring, showing two clasped hands, like an eternal handshake of the heart. Widely worn across Europe, it signified fidelity, trust, and hopefully not, let's just be friends. Then there's the language of flowers. You stroll into a garden next, low walls, tangled herbs, and the scent of lavender hanging thick in the air. A young man walks past holding a bundle of blooms, rosemary for remembrance, violets for modesty, and a single red carnation. Possibly to show affection, possibly just because it was on sale. Giving flowers meant giving a message, but it depended on the arrangement, the season, even which hand delivered them. One medieval record warns, "A bloom from the left hand speaks lies." That same record later admits this rule was likely invented by left-handed haters. You sit beside a stone fountain as two girls nearby practice composing a love riddle. One recites, "He wears a blade but fears the bee. His heart is yours, if yours for he." The other says, "That's terrible." They both laugh, because coded love wasn't just serious, it was fun. A flirtation puzzle, a romantic scavenger hunt across glances, gifts, and innuendo-laced embroidery. You glance down and notice a scrap of cloth beside the bench. Embroidered on it, crookedly but carefully, are the words, "I wait where the path bends." Someone's signal, a private rendezvous plan, a secret stitched into linen. This was the heart of so many medieval romances, not just the grand weddings or public dances, but the hidden threadwork of quiet affection. The smuggled note, the borrowed ribbon, the shared almond tart that meant, "I thought of you," and sometimes, a lock of hair. You duck back into a home where a chest sits near the hearth. Inside are tokens kept over years, a faded note, a half-finished song, a few strands of hair wrapped in cloth. Hair was considered a potent symbol of love, especially braided, which could imply binding two lives together. One lover even sent hair stitched into a pillow, presumably for dreaming about the donor, or mildly alarming any house guests. The room is quiet now. Just the crackle of the fire and the memories stored in objects that never spoke aloud, but meant everything. Because sometimes love survives not through declarations, but in what's left behind. Next, we're stepping into the spaces where love was denied, defied, and sometimes forbidden outright. Because while many couples found ways to express affection, others had to navigate much riskier waters, where the heart's choices collided with the law, the church, or society itself. The stone path turns beneath your feet, winding away from sunlit gardens and cheerful ribbons towards something quieter, more cautious. Here, the shadows are longer. The houses are set farther apart. The air carries a hush, like secrets waiting to be whispered. This is the edge of medieval love, the part where affection met resistance. Where not everyone was allowed to love who they wished, and those who dared had to do so under cover of darkness, behind closed shutters, or between coded words that only two hearts could truly understand. You pause beside a weathered gate. Just past it, a woman in plain wool is slipping a folded scrap of parchment into a crack between bricks. She glances around, then vanishes into the alley. Moments later, a young man, clearly from a different walk of life, retrieves it, reads, and smiles. He tucks it away, the way a miser might tuck away gold. Welcome to forbidden love. In medieval Europe, and frankly most parts of the world at the time, love was rarely a free choice. Class mattered, religion mattered, family alliances, dowries, and politics, all weighed heavily on who you could marry. Or even flirt with, or dance with in public without causing an ant to faint into the soup. You wander past a manor house where the shutters are drawn. Inside, a noble daughter might be composing poetry for the son of a servant. No one can know. If discovered, it wouldn't just mean shame, it might mean being packed off to a convent or forced into a strategic marriage elsewhere, pronto. Historians still debate how widespread such relationships really were, especially those that crossed class, faith, or gender lines. Surviving letters, poetry, and folk songs suggest they existed, but they lived in the margins. Take, for instance, the ballads sung by traveling minstrels. Many tell of star-crossed lovers, shepherds and noblewomen, monks and midwives, merchants and sailors' daughters. The endings vary, some happy, most not, but the feeling is always the same. Love trying to reach across boundaries it wasn't allowed to cross. You pause near a small well where two boys are speaking quietly. One hands the other a carved whistle. It's a simple gesture, but their posture says everything. In a time when same-gender affection was often condemned, this might be all they can do. Church doctrine in the Middle Ages left little space for non-normative love. Scribes wrote long, impassioned treatises about proper unions. Anything else was considered unnatural or even criminal. But human nature didn't always obey the rules, especially not the rules about the heart. Court records from the 14th century contain whispers of same-sex relationships. 2 women in France arrested for living together as husband and wife. A group of apprentices in Florence accused of improper affection toward one another. Were these isolated? Perhaps. Were they the only ones? Almost certainly not. You keep walking, past a row of townhouses. Behind one shutter, a girl lights a candle and holds it near a piece of paper with writing so faint it's nearly invisible. It's a love letter written in lemon juice, revealed only by flame. If someone else found it, it would have looked like blank parchment. This wasn't just romantic drama, it could be survival. Forbidden love also extended to interfaith relationships, especially in places like Spain before the Reconquista or parts of the Middle East under shifting regimes. A Christian and a Muslim, a Jew and a Catholic. These matches could cost more than social standing, they could cost lives. Still, the heart persisted. You reach a riverbank now, willow trees leaning toward the water like eavesdroppers. A couple sits nearby, one sketching flowers in the dirt, the other tracing their outline with a fingertip. They say nothing, and yet the moment is louder than any sermon. Some lovers eloped, ran for the hills, quite literally. The phrase, to wed at Gretna Green, became popular in later centuries, but the impulse existed long before. Records from German villages mention runaway marriages performed by sympathetic priests or traveling clerics with very poor eyesight. In one charmingly questionable case from northern Italy, a woman disguised herself as a man for nearly 3 years to stay with her lover, who believed her to be his apprentice. When discovered, the couple was exiled but, oddly, allowed to remain together. Possibly because the judge found the whole thing too confusing to untangle. Love finds cracks in the mortar. Sometimes it hid in fairy tales. You pass a market stall now selling worn copies of fables, each with stories of lovers defeating monsters or escaping wicked kings. Subtext abounds. One tale, popular in Wales, tells of 2 warriors who shared a sword, a bedroll, and a wolfhound. They die in each other's arms. The moral? True loyalty never dies. Historians suggest it means more than it says. And sometimes, forbidden love simply endured. Quietly, without fanfare. The kind that doesn't need ballads or statues or elaborate rings. Just a shared glance across a crowded chapel. A coded blessing in a marketplace. A name whispered at night like a prayer no one else hears. You return to the edge of town now, where the wildflowers grow between the stones. Someone's left a crown of daisies on a post, a symbol of fidelity. Next to it, a bit of charcoal scrawled poetry. We are not written in books, nor etched in stone. But I will know your name. When all the stars are gone. That's love, too. Not the kind that history celebrates, but the kind that survives it. And now, we move forward, toward the people who tried to make sense of all this. The advisors, the authors, the charm makers. Get ready to meet the medieval world's equivalent of agony aunts, love gurus, and potion brewing romantics. You step away from the edge of secrecy and into the well-worn corridors of advice, theories, and oh so many potions. If you thought only modern times had relationship coaches and internet love quizzes, let me introduce you to the medieval world's charmingly chaotic attempts at understanding romance. Welcome to the era of love manuals, emotional diagnoses, and mildly suspicious drinks served in pewter cups. Your feet echo in the hallway of a small scriptorium where monks and scholars once sat hunched over parchment, not only copying biblical verses, but sometimes, just sometimes, scribbling down thoughts on courtly love. You can almost hear the scratching of quills, the muttered sighs, and one monk in the back saying, "That's not how I feel about Margaret." The 12th and 13th centuries saw a surge in romantic philosophy, thanks in large part to works like De Amore by Andreas Capellanus, an actual, real medieval treatise on love, written for the French court. It included such helpful gems as, "Marriage is no excuse for not loving another," and, "A true lover never desires the embraces of any save his beloved." Mixed messages, anyone? You sit by a low window, leafing through one such treatise. The margins are full of doodles, flowers, hearts, and what appears to be a disappointed duck. Probably an early draft of Tinder. Historians still argue whether these texts reflected reality or fantasy. Were they aspirational guides for nobility, or satirical commentaries on how love shouldn't work? Some scholars think they were meant to be ironic, early rom-coms in poetic form. Others suggest they were genuinely used as instruction, particularly for young nobles who were more familiar with falconry than flirting. You pass into a cozy apothecary now, herbs hanging from rafters, dried roots on shelves, and a cat sitting in a cauldron it definitely isn't supposed to be in. The woman behind the counter offers you a love draft, made from rose hips, honey, nutmeg, and something she coyly calls hedge wisdom. Yes, love potions were real. Or at least, people believed they were. Medieval recipes for affection-inducing drinks abound, usually involving herbs thought to affect the heart or blood. Rosemary, basil, thyme, cinnamon, fennel, anything that could warm the body or brighten the mood. Of course, there were also riskier ingredients. Ground pearls, beaver musk, a potion from 14th century Italy included bad blood and powdered emerald. Whether it sparked love or indigestion is unclear. And not all remedies were for starting love. Some were for curing it. You settle into a chair in a sunlit herb garden as a young woman reads aloud from a healing manual. It recommends simmering mint with chamomile to ease a heart torn by unrequited affection, and sleeping with a pomegranate under one's pillow to dream of the one who truly deserves you. There were also talismans, rings with Latin inscriptions, carved amulets tied with red thread, even lockets filled with salt and sage meant to preserve fidelity. One London merchant swore by a necklace of dried apple seeds his wife gave him before every business trip. He never cheated, possibly because the necklace made him itch. You wander now through a schoolroom, where a young scribe in training is practicing calligraphy by copying famous love verses. One poem reads, "He who wins my gaze must first win my goat, for I trust the goat's judgment." It's unclear whether this is symbolic or just rural dating logic. For those in need of more direct help, love magic was an option. You pass through a village where a woman known as Aunt Tekla is respected for three things: healing sick animals, removing warts, and giving eerily accurate romantic predictions. She mixes mud and moonwater in a bowl, mutters something that sounds like, "Bernard will disappoint you," and hands the bowl to a hopeful client. Church authorities frowned upon such things, of course. Love magic was often condemned as heretical, especially if performed by women. But records show it persisted, quietly, humorously, sometimes desperately. There are even surviving love charms, meant to be recited under breath. One from France goes, "As fire loves flame, and bees love bloom, think of me. This very noon." You try whispering it, a butterfly flutters by. Coincidence? Probably. Still kind of nice. Advice also came in more literary forms. Troubadours, those musical romantics of southern France, composed songs full of longing, devotion, and what modern listeners might call strong pining energy. Their lyrics advised patience, kindness, poetic expression, and sometimes just waiting under someone's window until they noticed you. Don't try this today. Courtly love, as it was called, encouraged a kind of idealized affection. Love from afar, full of virtue, melancholy, and never-ending sighing. A knight might devote his whole career to a lady who once nodded politely at him during a banquet. Healthy? Debatable. Dramatic? Absolutely. You end up in a cozy reading nook, candle flickering beside a thick manuscript titled The Book of the Knight of the Tower. Written by a concerned father for his daughters, it includes such advice as, speak not too much with young men, unless you wish to wed early and without care, and, should a boy send you cherries, be not impressed. He likely stole them. There's something endearingly human in all of this. For every dusty rule or strange potion, there's a real person hoping, doubting, trying to figure out what the heart wants, trying to write it down in the right words, trying not to spill beetroot ink on their best parchment while doing it. And so, we leave this little library of love behind. Next, we arrive at the most public and permanent expression of love in the medieval world, the wedding. Time to tighten your belt, polish your shoes, and prepare for an event that might include 40 loaves of bread, 2 pigs, and a lute player who gets overly emotional halfway through Greensleeves. You arrive just as the bells begin to ring. Their low, rolling tones spill over the rooftops like warm soup over bread, calling the village to gather. It's wedding day, and you, lucky you, have somehow found yourself invited to a medieval celebration of love, contracts, awkward dancing, and an alarming amount of roast meat. The village green has been transformed. Flowers twist around archways, herbs are scattered across the dirt to keep bad luck away, and maybe bad smells too. And a few chickens wander through the scene, entirely unaware that they are not, in fact, part of the guest list. The couple stands near a small church door. She's wearing a gown made of her best wool, dyed with plant-based blues and stiff with starch. He's combed his hair and added a sprig of rosemary behind his ear. No one's dressed like royalty, but they look proud, nervous, real. And here's the thing. This entire moment is both romantic and legal. In the Middle Ages, marriage wasn't just a personal decision. It was a social contract, a spiritual bond, a property deal, a public performance, and, depending on where and when you lived, it could be declared binding simply by saying, "I take you as mine," in front of witnesses. No priest required. You slip into the crowd, standing between a cheese vendor and an elderly woman holding a goat who is, by all appearances, judging the entire event. The priest clears his throat and begins the ceremony. It's in Latin, and most of the guests don't understand it. But they nod respectfully, occasionally fidget, and someone sneezes exactly 3 times. There's an exchange of rings, or a ring, singular. Gold, if they could afford it. Iron, if not, sometimes inscribed, sometimes just polished smooth by years of hopeful fingers. Historians still argue whether love was truly the foundation of marriage in this era. Among nobles, marriages were often arranged to cement alliances. Among commoners, they might be more flexible, but economic stability, land rights, and family expectations all played their parts. Still, records show affection blossomed within many of these unions, even if they didn't start with fireworks. You glance toward the bride's mother, who's weeping into a handkerchief. Or maybe she's allergic to sage, it's everywhere. After the vows, the couple seals the moment with a kiss. It's brief, bashful, and met with cheers. Then comes the procession, a walk through town, arm in arm, with people tossing petals, herbs, and occasionally dried peas. Why peas? No one knows, but they hurt when thrown with gusto. Next comes the feast. You follow the guests into a large barn lit with lanterns and smelling of warm bread, stewed onions, and the faint musk of celebratory livestock. Tables groan under the weight of pies, roasted meats, root vegetables, and jugs of cider. At the head sits the newlyweds, glowing like candles despite the growing heat. The first toast is offered in rhyme. The second is interrupted by a dog stealing a sausage. The third, delivered by the groom's cousin, accidentally turns into a monologue about how he once milked a cow during a thunderstorm. Everyone applauds politely. Somewhere, a musician strikes up a tune. A lute, a flute, and something that might be a hurdy-gurdy. You can't quite tell. People begin to dance, stomping, spinning, laughing. The goat is still unimpressed. You eat something flaky and delicious that might be a mushroom tart or might be pigeon. Either way, you're not mad about it. Medieval weddings weren't one size fits all. Customs varied across regions. In parts of Eastern Europe, the bride might be symbolically kidnapped, then rescued, by the groom. In England, it was customary to break a loaf of bread over the bride's head for fertility. In Germany, the couple might saw a log together to demonstrate teamwork. That last one still sounds like marriage, honestly. You step outside for air. Stars begin to bloom overhead like delicate fireflies. Inside, the music continues. Laughter spills out through the cracks in the barn walls. Someone is already asleep in the hay. Love, in this moment, feels not like a legend or a poem, but a lived-in, slightly messy, thoroughly human thing. And eventually, even weddings end. The couple retreats to a small chamber, followed, awkwardly, by a few elderly relatives whose job it is to witness the beginning of the marriage. You're not invited, neither is the goat, blessedly. As you walk away down the path, the village fading behind you, you carry the warmth of the evening. Not just the food or the dancing, but the feeling of something lasting being stitched together. Thread by thread, vow by vow. Not every medieval love story ended in marriage. Not every marriage began with love. But in the soft glow of this night, with the scent of herbs still clinging to your sleeves and a bit of cider warming your thoughts, you can believe in the quiet, persistent power of affection. The kind that keeps bread rising, songs flowing, and hands reaching for one another in the dark. The music grows faint behind you. The stars wheel overhead, and your steps slow. Let's pause here. You've traveled far. You've wandered from courtly castles to candlelit letters. You've walked past secret trysts, awkward dances, coded messages, herbal charms, and goat-themed weddings. You've seen how love, real, awkward, beautiful love, took root even in a world that rarely made room for it. So now, we rest. Wind down, 300 words, the world grows quieter now. The songs fade into the rafters, the laughter settles into memory, and the last lantern sways gently on its hook, casting soft light across the empty green where feet once danced and vows were spoken. The path beneath your feet feels smoother somehow, each step slower than the last. There's a hush in the trees. The sky is velvet dark, sprinkled with stars like sugar scattered over cloth. And the stories, the love tokens, the whispered letters, the dusty poems, they all nestle softly around you now. Not asking anything, just resting alongside your breath. Think of the candlelight flickering in that cottage window, the pressed flower inside an old book, the lopsided ring carved from bone. Think of hands touching for the first time beneath a table at market, hearts racing over an almond tart. Think of eyes that lingered, even when they shouldn't. Whatever the world looked like, muddy, noisy, full of rules, it always made space, somehow, for love. Quietly, stubbornly, lovingly. And now, your breath slows. You are safe. You are warm. The stories are done, for tonight, at least. And in the space where words soften and the stars blink just for you, sleep waits gently, patiently, like a hand outstretched beneath moonlight. So let go. The goats are asleep, the lute strings are still, the parchment is folded, and the love stories, old and odd and tender, will wait right here. Close your eyes, let them